So, today we have a special topic, the infamous exchange French. So, after our introductory moves, the exchange French is when white exchanges on d5 and steers the game to a symmetrical position with a bit less tension than we are used to in the French defense. So the upside is, of course, the taking on d5 is far from the best move at white's disposal. And what's more important, very often, people who play this as white are not going to be very ambitious and will try to play for a draw. And I think one important point is that I will show some lines to early on unbalance the position a bit, but we shouldn't get too crazy about trying to push for a win. In my experience, it's enough to keep the game going. Sooner or later, there's going to be some interesting moments, and the more questions you keep asking your opponent, the more likely is that something will happen. You'll get chances, there will be mistakes. So with that said, let's see the main options for white. So I want to start with c4, which is the most enterprising move at white's disposal. So yeah, there are some people who try to be a bit ambitious here. And I like playing bishop b4 check, which underlines that c4 is a bit early. Knight c3. And now, after the normal development moves, this is kind of the main position. And here there's a very classical way to play, which is d takes c4, bishop c4, knight bd7, and then this knight is headed to b6, where it tries to control the critical square in front of the isolated white pawn. So it's a very solid setup, but as I said, the opponents who choose to play the exchange French, they want to still keep things under control, and given a chance, it would be nice to fight for the initiative. And to that end, I very much like the move knight c6. So the idea is that after castles, we play d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and now instead of, playing for the blockade on d5, we are resorting to the much more ambitious strategy of actually pressuring this weak pawn. So therefore bishop g4 is very logical, and I already quite like this position for black. So if f3, that's a move that weakens white's king, we just go back bishop f5, and on bishop g5 we can go bishop e7, just to diffuse this pin from the bishop g5. And I think generally speaking, having played f3 is not so great for white. So more logical is to play probably h3, ask the bishop where he's going. Here I'm taking on e2, and now a super important move. Also, just to take a moment here, why after h3 am I taking on e2? I think if we go, for example, to h5, then the moment the white queen is going somewhere, then knight f4 can also become an idea. So I think the bishop doesn't need, to stay in the game. It is actually doing its job by, not losing any time, but now bishop a5, that is the key move. And we want to reroute this bishop to go to b6, where it will obviously put pressure on this weak pawn. And if this pawn were ever to move to d5, then this bishop on c4 is really blunted. Like, it doesn't want this pawn to move forward. And in a way, playing d5, white is just relinquishing control over the dark squares. The bishop would get very strong on b6. On the other hand, if white ends up defending on the pawn on d4, then as you said, the next moves are going to be doubling on the d file, like queen d7 or queen d6 and rook a8. So I think this is already quite a pleasant position for black if one knows this maneuver with bishop a5, b6. And of course here, if white were to play a3, then we are super happy, because anyways we want to play bishop a5. So all in all, I think, this is quite a satisfactory position for black, and I'm not even sure how white should play this. So here, kind of the more classical moves are to play knight f3 or bishop d3, and we will try to get a similar setup for black. So after knight f3, I want to play knight c6, bishop d3, bishop d6. Here's an important moment, since there's a popular setup playing bishop g4, and then trying to castle queenside as black. This is very ambitious, and actually I want to caution you guys from maybe staying away from this plan. So I will show how play could develop, because up to here what black did is very normal. But it is very difficult to attack white's king since the pawn shield is intact. Like there's no like real hook that we can use to open lines, while on the other side, white has this easy plan with b4 where he already starts disturbing our coordination with b5 incoming. So for example, knight g6 to have a square to retreat to with the other knight in some lines, but of course going to e7 is also a little bit passive, but if you go knight a5, then it continues, queen a4. There was a game where black actually lost very quickly, playing knight f4, bishop f1. It looks nice, but doesn't achieve anything, the knight on f4. Now finally the knight had to be defended on a5, and now there's knight e5. Very unpleasant. So it has to be taken. Now we see that actually the knight on f4 is very loose because the queen is attacking everything on the fourth rank. And white's attack somehow is developing without any effort. And here I think it was already extremely bad for black, and the game ended very quickly like this, and the knight coming to c6. So as I said, with this pawn shield intact, it is very difficult to actually get something going, while I don't like that we give such a easy attacking plan for white with b4, b5. So I would stay away from this whole plan and instead play bishop d6. Or another idea is actually here knight b4 to unbalance the position immediately. So after bishop e2, since nobody wants to give up the bishops, there's bishop f5, forcing white's knight to a3. And now we can be very cheeky, go back knight c6, and the threat is simply to take on a3 and disrupt white's pawn structure. So that's kind of one idea, and going back for like a more standard setup, bishop d6, castles, knight g7, c3. Here, black simply has no problems after bishop f5. Soon we will castle kingside and everything is just looking good. So you can see there's a choice for black of how to play this position, and I would just stay away from castling queenside. And now we've looked at knight f3. White can also play bishop d3 here, and there I would play knight c6 to get the same type of position, like this. So that there are not too many different ideas for black. And I had omitted one thing. There's of course always a lot of move order topics, some possibilities that are at white's or black's disposal just because of the move order chosen. For example, after knight f3, knight c6, black needs to know this move bishop b5, after which play becomes basically very forced. Bishop d6, this is all theory and one just has to know it. dc4, d5, a6, bishop a4, b5. That was the only way to break the pin. Takes. So our pawns are disrupted on a4, c4, but we have the bishop pair. Castles knight e7, knight bd2, bishop e6, defending the pawn. So now, of course, we don't want that white just takes the pawn back and keeps his pawn structure healthy. So since we cannot keep this pawn, at least we disrupt white's pawn structure. c3, that's a nice motive. bc, and now we try to take back on c6. And after knight d4 castles, basically there's one trick to know, and it kind of finishes the line. So c4 is the very obvious move. And here we will reveal the point. Bishop takes c6. And what would happen after queen takes c6 here?
But something. Oh, so yeah. So there's a rook in the bounce not defended anymore. So maybe there's some like tactic that attacks the rook on a1.
Definitely. So after queen c6.
Yeah. So yeah, queen f6.
Yeah. Yes, that's a very nice double attack because we will either take on a1 or win the queen with bishop takes h2 check.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, since white cannot take the knight, then black is just totally fine here. And I went through these moves quickly because they're actually really natural. I mean, when we see this position from knight e7, developing, attacking on c6, Bishop e6 is developing and defending on c4. Now here was a key idea to, give the pawn up so that it disrupts white structure, since we cannot keep it.
Mm-hmm.
So also quite natural. Now we attack the c6 pawn, which is a nuisance. We have to finish development, and then there was just this one trick. So I think it's actually very straightforward. When you have looked at this line once with a bit of patience and kind of gotten the ideas behind the moves, it's easy to remember, I believe. Is there anything you want to revisit?
Yes, the classical position that we get from the knight f3, bishop b3 line, we have bishop f5.
Uh-huh.
So I need to have like sort of next steps after we get the position with the tension of the bishops and bishop f5. So d6, knight g7, bishop f5. A lot of people I see playing against me just trying to trade up everything. Like maybe something like queen c2 happens, and try to put pressure and trade everything off and draw.
Okay, I see. So of course we can take on d3, but I like to keep the tension, in white to improve my pieces instead of, taking on d3. So I play queen d7.
Yeah, then you can probably go with like bishop g5 here.
Okay.
Try to reroute to g3 and trade that one.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's say I castle.
Okay, maybe d2.
Here I will try to make something happen. So I'll take.
Queen takes back.
And queen f5.
Okay.
And my idea is that probably you want to take on f5, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But now kind of this bishop on g5 is corralled by my knight.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to go bishop h4, at the very least I can take it, and then we have some kind of unbalance.
Yeah, that's true. So they're really trying to be stubborn not to try to, trade the bishop for the knight. Maybe knight b3, try to go to c5 is another idea. And also if they go attacking the bishop, they'll go bishop b2 back, for example.
Yeah.
And if there's any rook e8, they'll go rook e1, try to... Okay, this is... Okay, then
yeah, we'll just limit you.
Yeah.
But you wanted to know in terms of plans. So let's say you do something like this, right?
Yeah.
I will go f6.
So
you go,
b2,
let's say, here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I go king f7, covering e6. And usually what I like to do is advance my pawns here.
Okay.
And then eventually, I'm always ready to disturb white's coordination. And maybe I exchange one rook on e8 and keep the other rook, since there's nothing going on the e file. And if I ever open up lines, then the rook will be useful.
Yeah.
And I feel that, that this is quite a pleasant scenario for black, because this bishop on d6 is better than the counterpart on d2.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we have this simple plan of expansion on the king's side, because we have the pawn on f6, which limits the knight on f3.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is kind of positionally not a good piece.
Yeah.
We can see that it's quite nice to have this setup with knight f5 and pawn on f6.
Yeah, but saying that, what if they go here, like h4, to block g5?
Yeah, good point. So here I will say that I like fixing the pawn on the dark square, since you have the dark squared bishop.
Yeah, and they go rook e2.
Okay, so I think I'll exchange one rook, as promised.
Rook e1. So, yep, and then what to do for black.
Yeah, so this c6 knight is not, having any purpose so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'll probably put it on e6, like this.
Okay.
And then I see that I have this pawn break with c5.
Yeah.
So I will entertain this idea. And either you will relinquish your center, which will give me more options, or I will push to c4.
Yeah.
And then my pawn avalanche is coming on this side as well.
I see.
Eventually b4, and black starts to be much better.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. And yeah, I've won many games in kind of this style as black.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.